Welcome to episode 41 of Lizzie's Bedtime Stories. My storyteller guest this evening is Judith Katz. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. We're there.
Yeah. Yay! So, I guess for posterity, what do they call it? The polar vortex is what we're doing.
Right. Well, the polar vortex happened about 3 weeks ago. This is a fragment of the polar vortex that seemed to have escaped from Canada and made its way down to Minnesota, where even those hardy souls who grew up here are freaking out. So,
yeah, where I live is until Superstorm Sandy, I didn't realize that I lived on the barrier island to the Jersey Shore. This used to be our summer home, and now we live here full time. Anyway, so I have the ocean 4 blocks in one direction, and I have the bay in 4 blocks the other direction. And during the polar vortex, I was really shocked to see the bay was frozen. That doesn't really happen usually because the salinity in it. Otherwise. And the other thing is, post Superstorm Sandy, we have such a high volume of construction that even without the weather, it's like, guess the detour.
Yes.
Will you be able to get home? I don't know.
Right, exactly. Yeah, well, here there's just a lot of spin-outs in the morning on the news, but it's very, very cold here. The wind is blowing, and monumentally, the University of Minnesota has canceled classes, which it's only done one other time that I can remember in the past 6 or 7 years. So it's cold. So,
damn.
So I'm going to try to read something that's a little hotter.
Good segue.
Yeah.
Excellent segue. So what is the weather like in your reading?
The weather in my reading is it's a Polish evening. It's probably, I don't know, maybe a little chilly, not freezing. I never even thought about what time of year this book starts out. I do know that the year that this book starts out is 1913. The book I'm going to read from is called The Escape Artist, and I wrote it in the 90s, and it was originally published by Firebrand, but thank goodness for Bywater Books, because they just re-released it last March. So what I'm going to read for you are the first several pages from the first chapter of The Escape Artist. And it starts in Poland in 1913, and this chapter is called Transatlantic Wedding Trip. So, should I start?
Absolutely.
All right. I begin with an epigraph from Muriel Rukeyser, the great poet. This is from a play she wrote called Houdini. Show me what's under the counter. Show me what's under your skin. Show me the way to get out, and I'll show you the way to get in. Part 1. Transatlantic Wedding Trip, 1913. Sweet Hankus, I saw a magic act in Warsaw once. I was 16 years old. It seems a long time ago. My best friend Tamar and I were searching the marketplace for my father. It was late, and I had a message for him from home. Well, by the time we got to his bookstall, it was all closed up, tight as a drum, and we couldn't find him anywhere. The rest of the marketplace wasn't exactly dead. Other stalls were open, and there were still plenty of people milling about. Close by, a handful of women bargained with vendors for the last rotten fish of the day, while half a dozen Russian soldiers in sharp creased uniforms stood around, smoking cigarettes and laughing at absolutely nothing. The vendors kept arguing when we walked past, but the soldiers whistled. We giggled because they embarrassed us. When we didn't stop to admire their big guns, though, they spat at us. Jews. Tamar's thin shoulders went up around her ears. Mine did too, but I couldn't resist the urge to turn around to those soldiers and stick out my tongue. One of them raised his hammy fist at us. The others held him back. In my heart of hearts, I prayed that his comrades wouldn't let him strangle a young girl in broad daylight. Still, one never knew. He was, after all, a soldier, and we were, after all, in Warsaw. Suddenly, I became terrified. I grabbed Tamar's hand, and we ran to join the small crowd that was gathered in the center of the square. What they were watching what Tamar and I watched too was a man eating fire. He was remarkable, Hankus. In his satin vest and pantaloons, he sucked in huge gulps of flame and then breathed them out again in a steady stream. But remarkable as that fire eater was, he was nothing compared to the magician who followed. When he stepped forth and swirled about in his sorcerer's cave, when he spun in a circle with his tall silk hat, those stupid soldiers with their quick fists and bad tempers disappeared from my mind as quickly as they'd frozen my heart. For what a magician he was. He snapped his long fingers and gold coins spilled out the tips. He shook a crimson scarf and it turned into roses. He pulled a rabbit from his top hat and a dove from his own gleeful mouth. Then he clapped his hands, and a tall woman with brassy blonde hair and a skinny blue gown appeared. He bowed to her like a gentleman, lifted her up with one hand, and laid her into a splendidly painted wooden box. Tamar and I stood with our mouths wide open, while the magician proffered a snaggletooth saw and waved it in the air. We held our breath as he proceeded to saw the beautiful box and the woman inside in half. The woman screamed as the saw went back and forth across what was by now her belly, but to me it sounded fake. Then the magician pulled the two brightly colored box halves apart, and she screamed again. That time it sounded a little more real. He tickled the feet of her sliced into bottom and the top part of her lap. He kissed her laughing mouth, and her split-off toes curled. Then he pushed the two halves of the crated woman together and spun them around. A minute later, he opened the box with great flourish, and up she stood, all put together exactly the right way. I never forgot that for the rest of my life. It's a lucky thing, too. Tamar and I couldn't stop talking as we walked home. How do you think she got back in one piece? I burst out. It's a trick, answered Tamar flatly. She snapped her fingers over a groshi and tried to make it disappear. I know it's a trick, but could you do it? The woman's part or the man's, she asked, a wicked glint in her eye. The woman's part is harder, I said. Think of it. You have to act like you're enjoying yourself, even when you're cut off from your own head. All the man has to do is wave a wand around and say some silly words. I could smell spring in the breeze that blew up from the Vistula. It was still a little chilly, but the trees were budding. I watched Tamar's red hair blow in that breeze. I also watched her lovely mouth. I wondered if I were to cut her in half, whether that mouth would keep smiling mischievously, and if she screamed, whether her scream would be anguished or false. Then I wondered what would happen if she were the magician, and I were the one cut in two, and a little thrill went all the way through me. It can't be that hard, said Tamar. One last time, she snapped her fingers. To our great satisfaction, the groshi was gone. Let's try it, my eyes flashed. You be the woman. No, you, Tamar whispered, and she leaned over and kissed me right on the mouth in the middle of Grabowski Street. Catch me, she shouted, and took off toward home. It made my heart beat unbelievably hard to chase her, yet I chased her fast as I could. Her wondrous red hair, blowing back in the breeze, pulled me toward her, and the taste of her dazzling lips on my own. You have those same lips, Hankus. When I look at you now, when I saw you for the first time all those years ago, I thought of Tamar. Yes, I said to myself, Hankus Slabarsky has the same dangerous mouth as Tamar. She may be alive still, and maybe she isn't. Maybe that speedy kiss she gave me on Grabowski Street was the last Tamar ever bestowed on a woman. Maybe it wasn't one of many. I never kept track of her after that. For the longest time, after I was taken, until I met you, I thought only of myself. I couldn't imagine life in Warsaw after I was stolen from it. If I imagined such a life, I was certain I would die of a broken heart. But at that moment, I didn't think about exile, although my fate had been sealed that same afternoon. I thought about soldiers and also magicians and Tamar's thick red hair and her lips on my own. I wanted her to kiss me again on the mouth, as that magician had done his divided assistant. I wanted her to linger, though, to kiss me slowly, to take all the time in the world. I wanted to catch her, take her up in my arms, and let her whisper love into my hungry ears. When we got to our building, I caught up with Tamar at last. Abracadabra, she shouted, and ran into her flat. I crept up the last flight to mine. I heard my father's voice then and another man's, laughing and chatting at the dining room table. I overheard them when, still flushed from my adventures, I came in the back door. You know, the stranger said, his voice like honey, my sister is a great fancier of books. I had a feeling from the first moment I saw you that you hailed from a family of quality, answered my father. In the morning after shul, come with me to my stall, and I will show you all of the rare books I have for sale. Perhaps you can bring something back for your sister, something Polish to remind her of home. My father, who was a reluctant salesman at best, sounded so enthusiastic about showing this man his goods that I wondered if he had been drinking. The man laughed, though not warmly. Oh, I'll find something. His Yiddish was Warsaw, but rolled into it was something else I couldn't recognize, a different juiciness. I'd never heard an accent like that before. Who's talking to Papa? My mother looked up from the soup she was stirring. Some foreigner he met in Shoal this morning. His name is Goldenberg. I sent you out looking for Papa an hour ago. Where have you been? You found them yourself, so what does it matter? I poked my head into the dining room. Back then, Goldenberg's sorry life hadn't caught up with him yet, and he was a handsome man. Even I, with my heart set only on Tamar, could see that. But right away, something about him rubbed me wrong. What's he doing here? You're awfully fresh. Your father met him this morning at Shul, and now they're having a cup of tea together, and in a minute, they're leaving for evening prayers. Since my grandmother's death, my father had become the kind of man who went to synagogue morning and night. Always he used to go on the Shabbos and holidays. But now, with his dear mother suddenly in heaven, he became even more pious. He went whenever he could to say Kaddish. I wanted to go with him, but it wasn't allowed. I craned my neck to see into the other room. My mother poked me on the shoulder, handed me an onion and a kitchen knife, and said, "You'll get to talk to him yourself tomorrow. He's coming for dinner." I shivered. "He's coming to meet you," continued my mother. "But why?" "Because he's rich and single and lonesome, Sophia. Enough is enough. Now chop." Okay, that's it.
Uh-oh.
What's the matter?
Nothing. I was saying uh-oh for her.
Yes, uh-oh for her is right. Not a happy life ahead for her.
Ay.
But then, things will change. And actually, I'm writing a sequel to that now, to this story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What brought you back to this story, to bring it to Bywater after all these years?
Well, because it's a really good book, I think, actually. And there is another book, a third book that I've written. This is my second book. My third book, The Atomic Age, is in a drawer. It's the legendary book in a drawer. And I've been working on it for a long, long time. And then something happened, and I just thought, I went to Argentina again with some friends, and we went to the place where this story ends, to the colony of Moisesville, which was one of the Jewish colonies that was started at the turn of the last century. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, okay, this story has to continue on. And about a little bit after this book first came out, somebody said to me, wait, without giving too much away about the end of the book, she said, wait, they're not going to just get away with this. Someone's going to come looking for them. And I thought, yes, someone will come looking for them, and they'll have to run away again. And so it starts, the new book starts with them needing to go someplace else, and they do, and they run into an old adversary along the way, and that old adversary has hooked up with people like Emma Goldman and some other people of that time who were in Europe right before the Second World War. So that's what brought me back. These characters are still very vivid in my mind.
Sounds like both books would be somewhat breathless at times.
Yes, well, this book was really fun to write because it kind of wrote itself. In fact, a friend who's no longer on the planet, Grace Paley, read this, and she said, "How did you do that?" And I went, "I have no idea." And I really don't. This book really did write itself. And also, I had been doing a lot of research, reading about Houdini, and Houdini wrote a magic book, but it's really hard to read. So, I could sort of follow these recipes for magic, but then all of a sudden something would happen and I would say, well, wait, no, they would get out of this bad situation by doing X or Y. And so it was very fun. I had a really good time writing it, even though there's some very sad parts to it, too.
Have you ever read the Illusionist series?
No, I have not.
Fran Heckrote, Heckrote, is a Bella author, I believe. And it has an illusionist as one of the main characters, and there's several in the series. And what's interesting is that she does have special abilities beyond the ability to fool those before her, and it has that kind of grit and breathlessness at times, and danger and excitement and love. It's definitely a good series. My favorite, though, of it is a little further down the line, and it's called Lilith. And you're familiar with Lilith from biblical mythology?
I am, yes.
It's fantastic. Like I'm a huge History Channel watcher. I'm always, tonight was like, banned from the Bible and the different theologians and their choices about what to include and what not to include, and how they felt about the Old Testament and whatnot. And I was really fascinated by that. And I love the idea of Lilith, this strong character who was like, sorry, Adam, but I don't think you're better than I am.
That's right. Well, and I think one of the interesting things for me as I proceed on with these characters is, Hankis passes as a man, but this is like way pre-transgender consciousness or whatever. And one of the things I'm playing with in the next iteration of these characters is switching around of who is in drag and who is not in drag, and who wants to have the power to walk through Europe as a man and who not. And, of course, we're getting to the point, this is between world wars, so we're getting to a point in this story where as Jews, they're going to have to make some other decisions, and why they're going to have to escape this next time and where to, if they have those options, is going to be part of what the story is as well. So I am dabbling, and I'm also dabbling with mind reading illusions and various kinds of cons. One of the characters, not one of these main characters that I read about, but another main character who shows up in the new version, is a specialist in Anastasia impersonators. So she's the Tsar's daughter that is or is not alive. I don't know if you ever saw that movie with Ingrid Bergman and Yul Brynner.
I did not, but when you were talking about cross-dressing, of course, I thought of Barbra Streisand.
Right, Yentl, right. Right, but this is about, this person who was actually Goldenberg's sister, Pearl Goldenberg, leaves the escape artist midpoint to have various adventures which do not turn out the way that she wants to. And so in this next version, I'm sort of showing what happened to her. And so there's a lot about conning people and using people, but also I'm trying to resurrect different parts of Jewish history as they relate to women. It's an old question I've had from the very beginning of my novel writing life about what happens to that Jewish woman who doesn't stay home or get married. My first novel, Running Fiercely Toward a Hyphen Sound, almost feels dated to me now, because it's a whole thing about who can get married and who doesn't get married, and now things have changed so much that it's almost like a historical artifact itself, even though it takes place in the 70s, so in Northampton, Massachusetts.
Oh, so Northampton. I know that. I went to Mount Holyoke, so...
When did you graduate from there?
98.
All right, well, you're much younger than me. I graduated from UMass in 73 and then went back, and I was at Smith in the late 70s, early 80s.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, I'm an old lady. I'm going to be 63 pretty soon.
Yeah, well, you sound like you're in your 30s, and
That's because, my friend, marijuana was an excellent preservative for many years.
Oh my.
Too. So,
did you get a chance to read Letters Never Sent?
No.
Letters Never Sent is by Sandra Moran, and it is about the time in the late 20s and the 30s when women were leaving small towns and farms to go to the big city, and it's set in Chicago. And there's a very interesting romance that happens within it. And her book is fantastic and historically based, but there are so many spoilers that I had a very interesting time trying to do the review episode. But I think you'd like it, considering that you're teasing out that particular time when women were making choices to leave the home, not through marriage, but, to get jobs and scrape by and all the kind of things that they had to do to make that happen.
Well, sure. And, Ilana Dykwoman's book, Beyond the Pale, is one that, it's this big book where she's talking about unions and union organizing and the factory fire. And I don't know if you've had her on as a guest yet, but she has many stories to tell, and is actually part of my cohort of writers. And we were in Northampton at the same time. We had kind of slightly different lives, but part of it. We were in the same house for a period of time. But she's somebody that you might really want to consider having on, because she's got a lot of historical analysis and a lot of good stories to tell. And her novel Risk is about the lesbian community in California.
Was Beyond Words open when you were in Northampton?
Yes.
I actually worked there for a little bit.
Okay, well, there you go. So I left there in the 80s and went to Omaha, Nebraska to work at a theater company there called the Omaha Magic Theater with a playwright named Megan Terry. And then in 1979, I went back to Northampton, went to Smith to get a graduate degree, and worked in a theater there called Chrysalis, which is still functioning with Andrea Hairston and a bunch of other folks from that group. And now I'm here in Minneapolis in the frozen tundra. It's howling out my window now.
Oh my goodness. I feel for all the dog owners who have to walk their pets.
Exactly. I unfortunately now have a cat who is testing out all the furniture in the apartment for the best sleeping areas. So.
Cats crack me up. I don't know how a furred animal can comfortably sit in the direct sunlight for an indeterminate amount of time. I'm like, aren't you hot?
No, they're just going someplace else. They leave their bodies and I don't know. They
have transcendental kitty experiences.
Right. I wish I had a little camera in their head to see how they think. They're very fabulous.
I have enjoyed our conversation, and I liked the little window into your novel, and it's fortunate that it's been resurrected by Bywater, and it sounds like something that my listeners would enjoy.
Well, thank you. It's been lovely, lovely, lovely chatting with you, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
I have a feeling we will.
All right, Liz. Thank you.
You're
Bye-bye.
welcome.